Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hey guys, Jesse Green here. Welcome back to the Savvy Dentist podcast, the show where great dentistry meets great business. We are in for an absolute treat today because our guest is a pioneer. Long before the word girl boss was ever a hashtag, Catherine DeVrye has been blazing a trail in business. She's been the Australian Executive Woman of the Year. She's been the head of the leadership and development team at IBM, and her clients read like a who's who. She works with Microsoft, Rolls-Royce, Qantas, Domino's, Hewlett-Packard, and many, many more. She has been there, done it, got the t-shirt, and everything in between. She is the author of not one, not two, not even three, but 8 books with a 9th on the way. She is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to business. In our conversation today, we're going to be talking specifically about managing change, overcoming setbacks, developing resilience and perseverance, because in Catherine's experience, working with the elite business people that she interacts with, and we're talking the who's who, the business titans, the quality and trait that she has determined that makes the most amount of difference to success in their endeavor is the ability to bounce back from failure and the ability to get back up on the horse and have another go. So our conversation covers a lot of territory, and Catherine shares some really interesting and practical tools that you can use in your practice to make sure you're going in the right direction, in the right pace, to achieve your goals and dreams and aspirations. So please, as always, do have a pen and paper handy. I know you're going to want to take some notes on this. For those of you that are new to the show, please come across and find us at the Savvy Dentist Facebook group. It's our place where we share tools, tips and training to help you grow the business side of your practice so that you can ultimately create a practice that you love as well as a life that you love. But for now, here's Catherine. Hope you enjoy the interview. Catherine, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day all the way from Manly to come and hang with us. How's things at the beach today?
I'm actually not at the beach. I'm in my office, but looking out, I can see the Manly ferry coming in, bright blue sky, a whiff of cloud, and a little bit of whiff of smoke from the bushfires.
Oh, okay. Well, Manly is a beautiful place to be, and I know that nature is an important part of your life and keeping centered and grounded, which we'll cover in a second. Your CV reads, it's incredible, to be honest with you. Every time I read your CV, I have this incredible sense of inadequacy looking at what you do.
Oh, don't be silly.
You've written 8 books. You're about to release the 9th. Your books have been endorsed by Jack Canfield, Edward De Bono, and others. And I'm really curious to ask, because when I read your bio, I read your background, I read the resources on your website, it feels like there's this master plan that you might have had with your life. And I'm sure it's not quite as linear and a straight line as all of that. But I'm curious to ask, how did you find your way into the work that you're doing now?
Well, I wished I had that master plan. I wished I still had it. I guess I consider myself very much an accidental author. I was expelled from English in high school, and I only started writing books to help others help themselves with information and knowledge and experience I gained along the way. But I guess everything in all of our lives go back to when we were kids. And my master plan when I was a child was to be a teacher or a nurse, because those were the highest socioeconomic roles that a girl could aspire to in my neighborhood. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, on the so-called wrong side of the tracks. And I learned, I guess intuitively at a very early age, that education was the key. And I ruled out being a nurse because, unlike you in dentistry, the sight of blood or bodily fluids just wasn't going to work for me. So my master plan was narrowed down to being a teacher. And I had to get quite a few part-time jobs to go to university, because you had to pay to go to university. I had part-time jobs, I had scholarships, I had student loans. And I was riding that reckless wave of youth towards my master plan of being a teacher when the year I graduated from university, both my parents died of cancer within a year of each other.
Wow.
And I was an only child with no family whatsoever. And even my best friend and husband were on the other side of the ocean teaching in Australia. And I thought, oh, I need a best friend. So I came to Australia with a backpack, $200, and a one-way ticket for a 3-month working holiday. And I've stayed over 30 years. So I often talk to audiences and say the biggest problem of my life turned into the biggest opportunity of my life. And I think it's the same with all of us, that there's always those opportunities that we don't see at the time when we're in the midst of a crisis or a setback, but they're always there. And we've got to use whatever energy we have looking forward, not wasting it going back. So to answer your question, I've really never had a master plan, and things just evolved. I didn't last long as a teacher. I then worked for the government, involved in studying the Life Be In It campaign, and was director of sport. And I was a political appointment. And then the government lost an election, so I therefore lost my job. And I had a mentor from the Melbourne Mount Eliza Business School that said, "Why don't you join IBM?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. IBM. No, I'm a people person. I'm not a computer person." But I joined IBM, and they gave me a wonderful career. And I was there for over 10 years in Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, and then decided that I wanted to go out on my own. And that was, again, quite accidental. One of our speakers had canceled at a conference. And I said, I can do that. And they said, no, we need an expert. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I started speaking to IBM conferences. And then IBM started charging me out to their clients. And 22 years ago, I left IBM to set up my own business as a professional speaker and author. And I guess like dentists, people think, there's the dentist, the technical side, the academic side of being a dentist. And you think of being an author, there's that intellectual side, but it's also the business of being an author and being a speaker and being a dentist. But I truly believe every obstacle has an opportunity.
Well, I think that there's so many rich veins to tap into in that introduction, and I'd love to just explore those for a second, because you've obviously had to cope with significant change. You moved across the world. You've also had to cope with significant setbacks. Losing your parents at such a tender age, 21, is phenomenal. And even before that, when we were talking off air, you grew up in an orphanage, and then you had your adoptive parents pass away at 21. I'm wanting to talk about learning from setbacks and coping with the change. So that seems like the perfect segue to dive on in. Catherine, what I'd really like to understand and ask is, when a terrible event or a tragic event occurs, it's easy to get caught up in the sense of, oh my gosh, my world has ended. It feels crushing. It feels like nothing is ever going to be the same. What good can come out of this? And when you're in that moment, it's hard to see through the clouds to where the sun might shine again. I guess what I wanted to ask you is, how did you see through those clouds to a point where there could be sunshine again?
Great analogy, because my next book is actually called The Gift of Nature, Inspiring Hope and Resilience, with lessons from nature about resilience. And you've got to turn your face to the sun in order not to see the shadows. But oftentimes we stand in our own shadow, which prevents us from seeing a light at the end of the tunnel and moving forward. I'd like to say that I just got on with getting on. That's what I'd like to say, but that wasn't true. And when my folks died when I was 21, I remember the doctors and nurses offering me psychology or medication. I went, that's for crazy people or people from California. We don't do that. I just get on with getting on. And the only funeral I'd ever seen was John Kennedy's, where Jackie Kennedy just stood very rigid. And so I really didn't have anything to go by. So I sort of stumbled my way through that. And then when I arrived in Australia, I was on a path of self-destruction, of overeating, over-drinking, over-partying, just trying to drown the pain. And I never told even close friends that after more than a couple of times that my parents passed away or that I was adopted, because it was the stigma of being illegitimate. And that really wasn't an issue for me. My parents dying was a much bigger issue than ever being adopted ever had been or ever will be. But I never even told close friends, because as a young person, there was a conversation that was just awkward, and there were no books on grieving in those days. So I read tons of autobiographies and biographies of people who'd gone through really tough times themselves, and just took snippets. But then I knew I had to make a decision. of, looking forward or back, because I went through probably a good year of feeling sorry for myself and this isn't fair and I'll just go out and have a lot to drink and drown the pain. And I just had to make a choice that wasn't going to work. And I think we all feel sorry for ourselves in times of despair. And I wish that I probably had have sought professional assistance in those days, but I never did until my memoir came out 17 years later. Journalists started asking questions like, how is it a Canadian came to win the Australian Executive Woman of the Year? That was the first time I kind of fessed up about my parents dying, and I felt really awkward about it. But the biggest problem of my life became the biggest opportunity of my life, being an Australian citizen, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. And I just had to, I think we all go through a stage of you feel sorry for yourself and you go, oh, this is fair. Then you've got to look at what you can do and not waste energy on what you can't change, because there was nothing I could do to change the past. I had to use every ounce of energy to be in the present and look towards the future and reset my dreams and goals. And I think every dream takes a detour at some stage, and we all have those stumbling blocks.
Yeah, I agree. I think every dream does take a detour, and in fact, it probably takes a dozen detours. And
I guess, and a few potholes along the way as well.
Exactly. Quite a few side journeys into the forest. Because your story is quite unique, and I guess everyone's story has unique elements to it, but this is really, truly unique because you've had to overcome this adversity, you've traveled to the other side of the world, and you've then gone on to achieve so much. As you mentioned, the Australian Executive Woman of the Year, and doing all the work with IBM and so on. I'm sure it wasn't a case of, okay, I've landed in Australia, now everything's rosy. How did you go about that process of recovery? Yes, there's turning to the sun and looking at the light and not getting in the way of yourself with the shadows. But on a practical level, there must have been things that you found difficult, or there must have been things that you did that you found helpful to move through that period of time, whether it was reconnecting with friends, whether it was absorbing yourself in work or learning more. I'm curious to understand what your path was, because I absolutely guarantee that someone listening to this podcast is going to be going through something that they're going, I just need to see a path forward. And I'm curious to ask what your path is so that someone might be able to go, that's a good idea.
And I guarantee there is someone listening to this podcast that's having a tough time, because we all do. And we don't just have one tough time in our lives, but we sometimes have many. And I think oftentimes if you experience setbacks at an early stage and you push through them, resilience is a little bit like a muscle. The more you use it, the more little tiny setbacks and losses you've got, the easier it is to pick yourself up and move forward again. I mean, one of the things that I did, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't listen to podcasts, which I would today for sure, but I read books of people that had had tougher times than me. I looked at situations that were much worse off than myself. I also kept a diary every night of inspirational sayings that got me through really tough times. And I would put some of those inspirational sayings on my bathroom mirror or on my fridge, very visible quotes, and just to kind of keep things front of mind and remind me what I wanted to do. And it didn't always work, but it was always there. And I probably was too proud to ask for help. I would certainly ask for help a lot more readily today about any business challenge I might have. I did throw myself into work, definitely. And in the absence of any family, I've probably been able to achieve things because I haven't had the responsibility of elder care for parents. I mean, a friend of mine one time said, was going through a very tough time with her parents, said, who both subsequently passed away, said, you're lucky you don't have to worry about elder care. I went, oh, and she felt really badly saying that, but she was absolutely right. And I think we have to look at what we can do. I had the good fortune when I first arrived in Australia of living in Melbourne and boarding with an elderly couple called Frank and Betty Jansen. And Frank had a lot of great Australian sayings, but one of his sayings was, Kath, shift happens. Now, Frank left out the F when he said shift happens.
Yes.
But shift happens in all our lives. And then years later, the term paradigm shift came into the lexicon. And, paradigms are patterns of behavior, and we've got to sometimes shift our patterns of behavior as well. And I had to shift my pattern of behavior from being on a path of self-destruction. And I did, there were books that I read, Norman Vincent Peale, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I got these motivational quotes, if it's going to be, it's up to me. And it might sound all very cliched, but those things helped me get through. And I then decided I needed to look after myself, my physical health more so, because as I said, I was eating too much, drinking too much. And I just made a choice that, to be healthy, because I really believe strongly in a healthy lifestyle. And I don't believe you can take care of others or help others if you don't take care of yourself.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. It's the whole oxygen mask thing, isn't it? You've got to fit your
Yes,
own
it
mask
is.
first before you can help others. I think in our conversations that I have with clients and so on recently, there's been a big, I suppose, a talking point really about looking after one's health, because for what you've just said, life is short. It's a gift. And of course, we want to make the most of it. And part of that is looking after ourselves, looking after our bodies, trying to be our best selves. And as you say, you can't help others unless you're in good shape yourself.
It's even more true these days, I think, because we recharge our mobile phones, we recharge our laptops, but what do we do to recharge ourselves?
Interesting, isn't it?
It is. And we people say, like when I'm speaking at conferences all around the world, people say, well, how do you have time for exercise? And I said, if I don't have time to exercise, to go for a walk, I don't have time, full stop. And I think in our very high-tech world, we can never lose sight of the high touch side of things as well, the skills that one has. I mean, like again, in dentistry, you would have very technical backgrounds in terms of the skills you would need to develop. But it's also the high touch side of things in terms of the so-called softer skills of dealing with your patients, building those relationships with your patients, but also making sure you maintain that relationship with yourself. And I used to speak purely about customer service, since good service is good business was a #1 bestseller, but then clients wanted me to speak about change. And I think service to our customers is important. And I think too often we confuse service with subservience. And we think that somehow service is the attendance of an inferior upon a superior. But it's not that at all. Service is really the act of being useful. It's the act of making a difference and being of service to your customers and your colleagues and your community, and ultimately of service to yourself.
I really resonate with that again, because as we just spoke about, if you're no good, if your own bucket is empty, it's hard to fill someone else's up. And it just goes without saying that if you're doing anything in life, you've got to be able to take care of yourself and take that opportunity to recharge, as you say. And I think it's doubly important in business as well, because oftentimes we spend a lot of time in dentists dealing with people, dealing with their stress and emotions that are accompanying dental treatment and coming to the dentist. And that's wonderful to help those people, but it is a depleting exercise. And so we need to be constantly recharging our buckets, refilling our buckets, I should say, and recharging ourselves so that we can then be of service to others. But we've got to be of service to ourselves first. So I really resonate with that.
That's great, because I know whenever I go to my dentist, and I mentioned I've had the same dentist for 30 years, she always gives me a little lecture about flossing. I mean, I floss every night, but for some reason I do it wrong. I always get this little lecture. And I said to her, Karen, you, as well as dental floss, you sometimes need mental floss. And mental floss is just kind of clearing your brain of stuff that's in there that doesn't really need to be in there. And for me, my mental floss is going out and walking in nature. It's having a surf in the ocean. One of my elderly friends, who's 91, refers to it as Dr. Salt. But going in the ocean, that's why I wrote a book about lessons from nature, about resilience, because to me, being in the ocean, being with the ions, even walking through the park to get there, that is like a mental floss, not necessarily a dental floss. And I think it clears the plaque of negative thinking. If that is too corny an analogy for your listeners.
I really like it. I think you should coin the term mental floss. I think you need to put a big TM after that, actually. I think it's a wonderful expression.
No, I've coined a few phrases, but putting a trademark under it doesn't make much difference unless you're willing to pay lawyers an awful lot of money.
Yeah, fair enough. So we spoke a little bit about setbacks and big challenges, and we spoke about your challenge with your parents dying. I guess there are smaller life events, little setbacks, little headaches, even change, because the world is constantly changing. The rate of change seems to be increasing. And certainly in dentistry, not just the technical side of dentistry is changing rapidly with computerization and digitization. The environment in which we're practicing is changing rapidly too. So that, for instance, there's corporates, there's health insurance companies, all these sorts of people. I'm wondering, how do you maintain an even keel when the world around you is changing?
Well, I'd like to say if you read my books, you'd be always positive and have that even keel. That's what I'd like to say, but it would not be true because I'm not always on an even keel. There are times I went through a challenging encounter of building a house a few years ago and had all sorts of dramas. None of it was life-threatening, but it was very stressful. And one of my friends at one stage said, "Why don't you read one of your own books?" There's no magic wand that anyone can wave. But one of the things that I think is so important that I speak to people about and I remind myself about as well is worry about what you can change. Don't waste energy on stuff you can't change, because too often we get into negative self-talk. And it's about, if he says this, then I'll say this. And if she does that, I'll do this. We imagine things are much worse than they could be. But it's a matter of we get overwhelmed from time to time. And I'm going to New York next week. And in preparation to go about 2 weeks ago, I was very overwhelmed with all the things I needed to do. So I had to just sort of prioritize. I'm a very big believer in writing things down. Prioritize in terms of the things that have to get done and the things that would be nice to get done, rather than we go off in so many different directions and we don't focus. So I guess from a medical perspective, you would probably look at triage. And I think we need to triage what our own problems are as well. But there's no use wasting energy on stuff in the past that you cannot change. And we all do it from time to time. You have to look at what you can change today and then what steps you can take to do it. Now, I've got a shocking memory, so I always write things down in terms of, okay, I'm a compulsive list maker so that I don't go off in too many different directions, which is always tempting with emails coming in and texts coming in, but to really focus on what is important and what needs to be done now.
Yeah, I really like that as well. Catherine, it reminds me of the serenity prayer in a sense where I think it's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I
know. And sometimes you go, I need more wisdom.
Exactly. I could do with an injection of wisdom right now, which is one of the things that I really like about going to see people older than me. And I always find that I've got a friend of mine, and we were talking off air, there's a friend of mine, Jerry from Nova Scotia, who always tells me, Jesse, if you think you're cold in Canada, go to Nova Scotia. You'll learn what cold is. But he's about 20 years older than me, and the thing that I love about going to visit Jerry and his lovely wife Jenny is he gives me the perspective and the wisdom to triage, as you say, those worries or frustrations I might be having, and go, Jesse, in the scheme of things, that one there, in a year's time, that's not going to matter. And I really appreciate the counsel that he provides me. I'm wondering, in your life, who's been someone who's provided you great counsel? Because you had, I think it was Frank who told you that shift happens. Who else has been an influence in your life to give you that counsel when you've needed it?
I've had quite a few. There's never been any one influence. I've been very fortunate to have great bosses along the way, and mainly males, I might add. I mean, an era before there was a lot of women mentoring each other. A lot of women of my generation were too competitive with each other, and I had a great boss at Youth Sport and Recreation when I was director of sport there, called Bert Keddy. And he was like a father figure to me in many ways, because I didn't really know anyone in Australia. And he offered me opportunities that I put my hand up and went for. I guess I've never been too frightened of taking a risk. obviously assess the risk and minimize it as much as I can, but I'm willing to have that good old Australian have a go. I guess I learned that, when you skin your heart, you skin your knees, and my heart was totally shredded when my parents died, so I wasn't worried about other little setbacks along the way as much. Sure, we all have a fear of failure. I also had another great boss at IBM called Roy Lee, and when he posted me to Japan as the HR manager for our Asia Pacific headquarters, he said, look, you might not succeed because you'll have all males older than you working for you, and you'll be the only female. So you might not succeed, but we're sending you as a role model for other women. So do your best. And I went, all right, that's not exactly a vote of confidence.
Yes.
But he gave me that opportunity. And I had just gone through a divorce. And so I went to Japan to make enough money to buy my husband's share of the house. And I remember the first few months, I was very corporate and very in control at work. And I'd go home every night and kind of burst into tears walking into a lonely apartment and not speaking the language, and have a bath and get up and do the same thing all bright and bubbly the next morning. But, none of that, again, was life-threatening. But I always try, that doesn't mean I don't burst into tears. You do have to really focus on what you can change and not what you can't change.
Yeah. Look, again, I think there's some wonderful words of advice there. Catherine, I wanted to just circle back to something you said, which was about the good old-fashioned Aussie trait of give it a go, have a go. And because I want to talk about the ability to spot an opportunity and then, as you say, have the courage to seize it. I'm wondering, as you've gone through life, obviously the harder you work, the more opportunities that come to you. But how do you identify opportunities? In my life, opportunities often come dressed up as problems. I'm wondering if that's been your experience, and how do you pull the layer of the onions off to get to the opportunity that lies beneath the outer problem?
I wished I had a nice, easy answer for that as well, but I don't. But you're absolutely right, Jesse, that so many opportunities come disguised as obstacles. And you go, I don't need any more opportunities today sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
But how do you peel the onion? Can I say I don't know the answer to that?
You can absolutely say the answer to that.
I believe that change is inevitable, but learning from change is optional. And I often ask myself, so what's the learning opportunity here? But that's after I've, swearing at or, cursing or getting angry or whatever. I try and bring it back to where's the opportunity? Where's the learning in this situation that I really don't want to experience?
I think, well, firstly, what I really love about what you said is I think that's just the absolute gospel truth, because sometimes it's hard to peel the onion. If I knew how to peel the onion, I'd be a billionaire by now, because it would be so good. But the thing around the peeling the onion, I think, is this is just my take on it, Catherine. I'm very happy for others to disagree with me, but my take on it is firstly just understanding that there's an onion.
Yeah, so true.
And just going, well, there might be underneath this problem, there might be an opportunity, and sometimes there is, and sometimes there's not. To be honest with you, sometimes a problem is just a problem,
exactly.
right?
Sometimes there's just a whole bag of onions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
just not fun. But I guess for me, it's like you say, it's asking those questions. Is there an opportunity here? And perhaps just having the presence of mind to at least examine the possibility. Your life has been rich and varied, and you've written 8 books, 12 languages, bestseller after bestseller after bestseller, incredible list of accomplishments. You've had Edward de Bono, Jack Canfield, Sir Edmund Hillary endorse your work, which is incredible. And you've had massive clients along the way, which read like a who's who, Rolls-Royce, Microsoft, Qantas, Domino's, tons of really high-profile businesses, tons of really high-profile people. One of the things I'd like to just touch on around that, because you've had the opportunity to meet and mix with people that many people won't have the opportunity to meet and mix with. And of course, there are lots of things that unify us. There are things, we all pull our pants on the same way in the morning, and everyone has problems and challenges in their life. But one of the things I'm curious to ask you and to get your commentary on is, as you've met some of these luminaries, people who are really at the top of their field, what I wanted to ask you is, have you identified any common threads or common traits that have led to their success? And what have you taken from those interactions and applied to your own business?
Just about everybody I've talked to off stage or offline has had more failures than they've had success. They're willing to try more often, fail more often, and pick themselves up more often. It doesn't, and I would never reveal any of those private conversations, but many have written about it in their biographies and their memoirs, and it's their stories to tell. But one of my favorite sayings that was included in another book I wrote called Hope Happens, which is the opposite of shift happens, was a Japanese proverb: fall 7 times, pick yourself up 8. And that's, I think, really important, is in terms of to be successful at anything, you've got to have lots of failures as well. One of my favorite stories, I don't know if it's apocryphal, from I don't know how many years ago I heard this, when Edison was asked by a journalist, "How does it feel, Mr. Edison, that you've failed so many times to discover the electric light bulb?" And he said, I haven't failed 999 times. I've just got 999 ways closer to knowing what doesn't work to find out what does work. And so to me, that's the common thread. And I don't think the most successful people are necessarily the smartest people, are necessarily the most creative or the most innovative, but ultimately successful people are the ones that have all of those talents, but they're the most resilient. They're the most persistent, that hang in there. And I mean, I've been very fortunate to have lots of books with major publishers, but what's not on my website is how many rejections I've had from publishers. I mean, and I think that is so important as well, because whether you're rejected by a publisher, you're rejected by a boyfriend or a love interest, you're rejected by an employer, you just pick yourself up and keep going, because oftentimes it's not you, and you shouldn't take it personally. You're just not the right person at the right place for that job, or the right person for that person. And I think that resilience and that perseverance is just so incredibly important.
Yeah, I think it's Angela Duckworth in her book Grit, which talks a bit about that as well. And one of the things that I like that you've just spoken about there is the combination, though, of resilience and perseverance. And I think that's the key, isn't it? It's the two things together. It's not one or the other, it's having both, because being able to get over it is one thing. It's another thing to get back up on the horse. And I think that both of those two qualities going hand in hand make a difference. Catherine, as we talk today, I know that there's a lot of things we could cover. We could talk for days, and I really enjoy our conversation. I wanted just to round out our conversation today, though, with just the concept of cultivating resilience, cultivating perseverance. And as you said, resilience is like a muscle. The more you use it, the better you get at it. But is there anything that, again, you've either done or observed it's really kind of built that muscle faster or better than other things?
We also talked earlier about just switching off from time to time as well, and giving that muscle a rest. And that's something that I'm not great at as well. I really have trouble trying to switch off my mind. I've tried meditation. To me, being out in nature certainly does help on that. But it's really, there's no one thing, and it's different. Just like every sunset is different. Every person is different in terms of the challenges they might have or how they might cope with them. I mean, I might like to go for a surf in the ocean. Other people might think, I don't want to get wet at all. And I think it's a matter of finding individually what works for you, what takes you to your happy, your calm place. And just take some moment to breathe. Again, in The Gift of Nature, I've got a little analogy in there about inhaling the future, exhaling the past. And sometimes just even taking time, and this is something I do quite regularly, just taking a break from the computer and just go, and do that 3 times. It might take 20 seconds. It's not as good as like properly meditating or properly going for a walk, but just to take that time out to recharge.
Yeah. Again, I really resonate with that as well. It's got to, as we said earlier, you've got to fit your own oxygen mask first. And I think there's a lesson there for lots of people on this show, because a lot of people are fitting other people's masks, which is wonderful and selfless and all those things. And it's important to look after oneself at the same time. So
I totally believe that. And even though I would often speak about customer service, I do say, they say, the customer is the most important thing. Well, and the customer is always right. I actually don't believe that. The customer is important, but you can't look after your customers if you don't look after yourself. And if you're distracted with, I don't want a dentist that's worrying about, what's happening with someone else. Is that drill's going down my tooth? I want him totally focused on what he's doing, or she is doing with me. And I want them to be in a calm place rather than just me being a patient and come in, let's move them out like a production line.
Yeah, exactly. It's the human to human stuff. It's those soft skills you spoke about earlier, right?
The high tech and the high touch.
Yeah, absolutely. That is dentistry to a T. High tech, high touch.
High touch. No pain. I don't like pain. It's amazing. We can put a man on the moon, but we still can't have drills that don't sound like they're going to go through your chin.
Well, it's in progress. Catherine, you've been incredibly generous with your time today. And firstly, from all of us here at the Savvy Dentist podcast, I want to say thank you. Not just generous with your time, generous with your insights, generous with your knowledge, and particularly generous with your wisdom. On your website, you're described as a combination of a baby boomer with the energy of a Gen Y. And I think that shows through because you've got this joie de vivre, a zest for living, and it shines through in all that you do. We salute you. And we thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and hang with us. You've been a trooper and a gem. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Jesse. Look, I'm just an ordinary person that had extraordinary stuff happen to me through no choice of my own. And I think it's just important for someone who never even told friends that I was adopted or my parents died. Now I share my story with total strangers just to help them turn their stumbling blocks into stepping stones faster and hopefully more elegantly than what I may have done. So thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much once again. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessegreen.com/savvydentist.